It's so great to have everybody back in California. I'm so pleased to be here, see some familiar faces, some familiar friends, some new faces. So I'm really delighted that you're all able to come here. It's been a journey for us to get everybody here, but we're here. Today we're going to talk about building the green machine to achieve net zero. As we know, sustainability and driving down emissions is a real big issue right now. Something that we really need to move the dial on for today, for tomorrow. And I've got a great panel lined up. Achieving the net zero utopia requires a combination of short-term adaptation of greener processes, as well as major innovation and wholesale change to the vehicle logistics ecosystem. In this session, we'll discuss some of the initiatives that are driving positive change and how innovative strategies can help in rebuilding stronger and more sustainable networks to achieve carbon net zero logistics. Today, I'm joined by Chris Cannon, who is the Director, Environmental Management and Chief Sustainability Officer at the Port of Los Angeles, Daniel Gosson, who's Manager of Finished Vehicle Logistics at North America for Inform, and Rocky Loessin, who's Vice President of Sales at TrinityRail. Gentlemen, thanks for joining us today. Pleased to have you with us. Chris, thanks for coming down. I know you've just joined us and you've taken the drive down. Let's start with you. Give us a little bit of an overview of some of the things that are happening at the Port of Los Angeles. You've set some ambitious targets to become net zero, and of course, we're working on multiple other areas around sustainability of the port. But why don't you give us a little bit of an insight of some of the things that you're doing and some of the projects you're working on to help achieve these goals?
Happy to do that. And first of all, thank you for inviting me to be a part of this today. It's an honor to be able to talk to you all and members of the industry that we interact with a lot. And so really appreciate being able to chat and have this discussion today. I'm the Chief Sustainability Officer at the port, and so we are doing an awful lot of things these days. We're in the news. There's 100 ships off the port, both LA and Long Beach, and so my advice to you is if you're going to do your Christmas shopping, if you live here in Southern California, you want to do Christmas shopping, do it now. Don't wait, like a lot of us do, until mid-December to sort of go get stuff, because you may not get it. The logistics system is all backed up all the way through, not just the ports, it's the warehouses, and a lot of things are all just backed up. So, but as far as net zero and our goals, we after COVID, we think that climate change is probably the biggest crisis facing the world today. We have got to do something this decade to really turn things around and to begin to reduce our carbon footprint. We must work together. This is no longer a Port of Los Angeles program. This becomes a world program. And we need to all, as an industry and as a world community, come together and find ways to reduce our carbon footprint. We've set goals for ourselves at the Port of Los Angeles for zero carbon fuel cargo handling equipment by 2030 and zero carbon fuel drayage trucks by 2035. We're working on programs for other source categories with ships and trains and hovercraft as well. Just quickly to tell you a little bit about what we're doing, the biggest challenge we face, of course, is that the technology to transition away from combustion-based engine technology into electric, or whether it's battery electric or fuel cell, is still in some early emerging stages. So we have to find a way to work with industry, work with the operators of the equipment, and also the manufacturers of the equipment to begin to get the equipment out into the field, to get it tested, so to make sure that it can meet the duty cycle needs and the operating needs of the operators, and then the manufacturers need to get feedback from the operators to make sure that the equipment can in fact do what it's alleged to be able to do. So we're testing in the next 2-3 years. We'll probably have 200 or 300 zero-emission drayage trucks out of the road between various programs that we're doing and supporting either directly or indirectly. We're right now doing a really interesting project with Toyota and Kenworth and UPS and Shell testing a hydrogen fuel cell truck. There are 10 of them. They're actually operating now. We also, with Shell, have opened up 2 new hydrogen fueling stations, one in Wilmington and one in the Inland Empire. And the operators of the trucks so far say they're fantastic. The advantage of hydrogen is that you get a little more range, and you also get you don't have to charge it overnight. You can fill up a hydrogen tank in 15, 20 minutes. So the operators like it. We're excited to have Toyota be a part of it. When they do things, they usually do it right. They take their time, but when they get it, they get it. And so we're excited to have them be a part of it. We're also working with Daimler and Volvo, testing battery electric trucks. Those guys are good. They know what they're doing. And so we're excited to be involved with them. We're working with the equipment manufacturers. We're testing the world's first battery electric top handler, which is like a forklift, but it just lifts from up. And it's pretty exciting. It has a battery, a 1 megawatt battery, which is like crazy. But it was Taylor Machine Works wanted to make sure that they had enough of battery to last for 2 shifts. So we're doing that. We're testing yard tractors, and they're battery electric as well. We're working with the shipping industry to begin to deploy ships with low carbon fuels. We're working with them. They're working with methanol, renewable natural gas as a feedstock there, and also renewable LNG. We're looking at trying to create a green shipping corridor or multiple green shipping corridors where we do digitization of the route itself. We do a web portal which allows for everybody to log in and see what cargo is coming and when for as much as 2 weeks in advance, which allows for a lot of planning and organization when the cargo is unloaded, which also reduces emissions, reduces the number of touches on a box. We want to try to obviously reduce the carbon intensity of the fuels of the equipment that handles the ships. And so the idea is that from the gate, the originating gate when the cargo arrives to the gate when it leaves at the end, you've got a green pathway. And so we want to work and want to see how these processes can work. We hope to work with the Asian ports. We hope to even begin to announce something in the near future with some of the Asian ports and the cargo handling equipment as well. So I'll stop there. We're working on all the different source categories and working as best we can. We're working with the agencies to kind of address their needs, working with community groups, non-governmental organizations as well to try to coordinate these activities. But it's exciting. We're on the cutting edge of technology, and it's kind of fun to be doing this.
Yeah, I'm sure it is. I was up in San Pedro and I got a view of the port of LA and Long Beach, and when you think of the magnitude, you see the size of that from that distance. Your job is that doing this isn't necessarily easy, right? It's not an easy thing to say, okay, we're going to do this because of the sheer magnitude and scale of the facility there. I mean,
well, sure. We're the largest container port in North America, and with the port of Long Beach, I think we're number 9 in the world. And so, almost 40% of containerized goods that come into the United States come through that corridor. So the chances are you've got something either on your back today or in your house that came through our port complex. So it's an awful lot of activity and a lot of people. It's not just us. It's a major logistics industry that supports the movement of this cargo. And so we've actually been lucky. We've been able to coordinate with the maritime industry and partner with them to reduce emissions. They have all, including the shipping lines, they tell us that their customers are asking for this, and that they want to have green shipping of goods movement. And so everybody's asking for the same thing, and so we're all kind of pushing to go in the same direction. It's just the technology is still new. So we have to begin to test it, we have to deploy it, we have to work with the operators to make sure that the equipment is new and can work, I should say, and can meet the duty cycle needs. But everything, we're looking at zero-emission locomotives, we're looking at a zero-emission tugboat. Everything is in play. And so we're excited, but we must reduce our carbon footprint. We have no choice. This is not a, gee, wouldn't it be fun if kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. It's, you know, a few years ago we were talking about these kind of things. You know, oh, wouldn't it be great to have, you know, zero-emission tugboat or a ship? You know? Yeah, and these things aren't necessarily, you know, easy just to replace.
No, they're not.
Because there's a capital expenditure to those as well, and a life cycle of those assets as well, right?
Well, just to give you an idea, I mentioned that we're testing the very first battery electric top handler. It works great, by the way. The operators are really happy with it, but it costs 3 times what a regular top handler costs. That's too much. So that's gotta come down. The operator, Taylor, tells us that they can bring that price down once they get into, you know, full production mode. But these prototypes are expensive. The hydrogen fuel cell truck I was referring to with Toyota and Kenworth, $1 million is what that prototype costs. That's not something you can, you know, that doesn't work. That doesn't pencil out. So all these things have got to come down, and we believe they will. Toyota tells us that by the mid-20s they'll have these things at a reasonable price, and so, you know, we're excited, optimistic, and just looking forward to seeing how it evolves.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you very much, Chris. We'll come back and we'll talk a little bit more. Next up, let's hear from Daniel. Daniel, you, of course, working for Inform and do a lot of network planning and optimization. Tell us a little bit more about, you know, your view on this and how, you know, we can start to build the green machine using technology as a base.
Sure. Yeah, I think they should be bringing up my slides. So a lot of talk about being German companies. We're German as well, so I've got 156 slides that we'll get through probably through lunch. So we're well prepared. Got the clicker. Going through and getting ready for this, I touched on, or rather talked to Dennis Manns, because I wondered, how did they move staged coaches once he started his career? So good to see Dennis is up front. Okay, perfect. Thanks, Dennis. But honestly, so as Neemish said, Inform, we touch on a lot of different pieces of the finished vehicle logistics value chain, right, from a software perspective, and especially from optimizations of, you know, compound management or yard management, network planning, things like this. What you guys see on the screen there is actually a photo that I took just a few weeks back when we were over in Zeebrugge, visiting with one of our partners, that they have implemented a wind park that has over 11 turbines that is not only charging all of their EVs that they handle on the yard, but it also provides power to a lot of their other workshops and things like this. So, you know, to the network perspective, one of the other things that we've done, and a lot of companies are talking about, how do we track carbon? And anytime that you talk about tracking carbon, reducing carbon, or creating sustainability, that really bad C word comes up, which is cost. So it costs too much to do this. It costs too much to try to create sustainability. And what we found working with some of our partners and doing network studies is that when we optimize for cost alone, we get a pretty good network from a cost perspective that has pretty terrible lead times, right? So you're really forfeiting your lead time from that. When you do it for lead time, you sacrifice a little bit of cost, but you get great lead time. Your customers are happy. But when you go and you do it for sustainability, cost increased slightly. So yes, you pay a little bit more to have more sustainable routes, but we also found that the lead time was the same that if you optimized by cost. So, and this is using real automotive routes, and that's from a strategic design, but also you can implement that on a daily basis. So not only could you optimize your day-to-day, month-to-month routes for cost and lead time with the different shifts, with the different disruptions that are occurring, but you could incorporate sustainability into that. So CO2 tracking is great, but it's kind of like tracking what you eat. If you don't change what you're eating, then you're not going to get any results. And so by taking that data, being able to process it, and then being able to leverage, better routes, better partnerships, and things like that so that you can reduce your CO2 emissions, that's great. So getting back to the cost aspect, sorry, I think I got close to the mic. I wanted to bring this up. So this is really my only other slide, and it's the one we'll talk about the most, just really quickly. But when we talk about sustainability, cost comes up a lot of the times, and I think Trent from Acertus earlier said that we're capitalists, right? So we're motivated by money. We don't make decisions unless there's a monetary gain that we could probably get out of that. So one of the things that I wanted to point out is that when you're utilizing a tool that can optimize, sustainability could be a side effect, and it could be free sustainability. So if you can use better berth optimization and better offloading of your vehicles within the compound itself, and you reduce your kilometers that are driven, or your miles that are driven, sorry, I was going to say, everything's from Germany, so usually it's kilometers, but they threw me off and they did miles now. So if we can reduce our mileage, then not only do we reduce maybe our labor force requirements, which is a topic right now as well, so less drivers moving more cars in the right moves, but you're also reducing your CO2 emissions because the cars aren't idling while you're doing consolidation. They're not running. And some of the worst CO2 emissions are under 15 miles an hour, which most ports, you operate under 15 miles an hour or so, or at least you should be. And so not only just from that aspect, if you look at all of your other touch points throughout, and this is just for a port, for example, if you reduce waiting time at the gate for the trucks, if you can reduce those unnecessary movements, what you're doing is getting better operational efficiency and you're reducing your costs, but you're getting sustainable. And your marketing team will love you. I promise that if you could say, we made an investment, we reduced our carbon footprint, they're going to be all over it, right? Is to say we're getting towards net zero and we didn't have to invest in it realistically. It was an added benefit of being more efficient from our operations. So, I think from that aspect, yeah, I can turn it over to Rocky, who can talk a little bit more about from the rail perspective, but there's a lot of shifts that can happen to be more sustainable, and whether it be shifting from truck to rail or using truck more intelligently, because we don't want to get rid of truck. It's a great service, but if we can leverage that, we can also offset the driver shortage. So I think sustainability is a catalyst for a lot of decisions that could be made that can solve some other logistics problems as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Daniel. I think that's a really important part, and a part of the jigsaw puzzle, right? Because it is a jigsaw puzzle.
For sure.
It's about people, it's about process, about technology, innovative change, And we have to take it step by step and look at every opportunity that we can to reduce that. And if that, utilizing technology as a software to optimize those routes is going to help drive that, then, clearly that cost element is going to be there, but, how do we kind of minimize that as well?
For sure.
Thanks. We'll talk more about that as well. Rocky.
It's good to be here. So I'm going to start with a disclaimer. I am not an environmental expert, and I am not a climate change expert. I'm just the vice president of sales for TrinityRail. And a lot of you might be asking yourselves right now, if I'm not a subject matter expert on these things, why am I on this panel? And allow me to present my credentials for just a second. First and foremost, this is a personal passion of mine. I've got a lot of skin in the game on sustainability, and it's not even my skin. It's the skin of my 5-year-old, my 4-year-old, my 2-year-old at home. So this is something that's very personally passionate for me. It's important for me as a father to be a good steward of our environment so my children can inherit an environment where they can raise their own happy and healthy families. Second of all, I am fortunate enough to work in an industry and for a company where sustainability is constantly on the forefront of everything that we do. It's something that is very important for us, and it's something that's just inherent to our business in general, and always has been. To be clear, TrinityRail is not a shipper, and we're not a transportation provider. And you'll notice by my slide that I'm throwing up some stats, and these stats are actually the accomplishments of our Class 1 partners. And I'm not going to read verbatim on the stats, but I think that first one is very important, which is on rail right now, you can move 1 ton of freight almost 500 miles on 1 gallon of diesel gas. This isn't something that's a goal. This is something that has already been achieved and exists today. This is important because having rail as part of your supply chain helps reduce your carbon footprint. Now, what TrinityRail does to help contribute to this is we help provide products and services to our Class 1 shippers and to our customer shippers that allow them to achieve more sustainable shipments and supply chains. Some of the innovations and products and services that we're offering right now include, did you know a rail car is a 50-year asset? And not only is it a 50-year asset, but it's a completely recyclable 50-year asset. At the end of that asset's life, it's steel. There's no engine, there's no oil, there's no hazmat. We simply melt it down and scrap it out and create a new rail car with it. So in itself, the vessel is very sustainable. In addition to that, as an industry and as a company, we're looking at different ways to recycle within our existing fleet of rail cars. There's a lot of unused rail cars, freight rail cars out there right now that are idle in storage. And one of the programs that we're doing currently is we're bringing in those assets, we're recycling the usable parts, which is the running gear on them, and we're rebuilding a new asset on top of that running gear. And what we're able to achieve there is, once again, that idea of recycling and sustainability, where we don't have to manufacture a new asset. We're actually taking inefficient assets off the rail, rebuilding them as something that's viable that can be used without having to produce a new asset. So it's very exciting. In addition, specific to this group, we're looking at ways to be innovative and efficient with feedback from some of our shippers and partners. A great example is on our Hourglass auto rack right now. We're looking at the side screens, and we're looking at how we can redesign those side screens so that they are more aerodynamic and create less drag on the cars as they're going down the lines, and hopefully improving that almost 500 miles per gallon number, right? And so we have partnerships on that. There's a lot of things that we're looking at on our existing equipment and how we can improve it. And then finally, it's very important for us as a manufacturer to be able to produce something kind of green out of the gate. And it's that idea of taking a look at our own manufacturing footprint, making sure that we're making that as efficient as possible with the most efficient processes, and being able to create a sustainable car that may not be carbon neutral, but is getting closer and closer to that goal every day. Beyond the products, and we've had a lot of conversation about this, is we're involved in a lot of services right now because, as was mentioned before, part of sustainability is efficiency. The more efficient you are on the rail lines or in the supply chain in general, the more you're contributing to a green environment. So one of the things that we're really involved in right now is telematics and advanced AI software. And we have a program called TrinSight. One of the biggest complaints that we hear often, and I'm sure a lot of people in this room can relate to, is that idea that rail tends to be viewed as somewhat of a black hole in the supply chain. And we're making a lot of efforts to change that so that you have visibility of your supply chain from start to finish. In addition to that, we're partnering with a group known as Rail Pulse, which is a collaboration between Class 1 shippers, manufacturers, and lessors in order to really promote adoption of telematics across the industry. But, rail for us is a very important and efficient way to move freight. And by supporting rail, you're supporting sustainability. I'm not saying it's the only piece. As a supply chain, we have to take a look at the whole, and that holistic approach includes what we're doing with shipping, what we're doing with rail, and what we're doing with trucking, and how they collaborate to work together to provide a more sustainable supply chain. But it's something that's very achievable, and I think rail is an intricate part of that.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Rocky. I think important points you're making there about the different modes and what you're doing there. Of course, there's other things that, in terms of the materials you're using, lightweighting, there are numerous opportunities. As Chris, as you talked about, there's numerous areas and opportunities where we can start to look at that. I guess, for me, we're talking about all of these things, but where do you see those kind of roadblocks, right? Because every time we go to do something, it's like, okay, but it's either cost or it's lead time or it's, capex or, it's an infrastructure build or something like that, right? So, what are those roadblocks and how do we start to overcome them to actually push this forward? As you said, Chris, this is that we need to deal with now, right? So let me start with you.
Well, one of the things that as I said, it's technology. You kind of said it all, right? It's cost, infrastructure, technology. I mean, those are all things that have to be planned for as you transition to different type of equipment. But one of the things that I remember, and I looking around, I think most people in this room are old enough to remember the Betamax VHS thing that happened. And so there's this whole thing about which technology is going to win. And at an early stage in the evolution of technology, sometimes you can guess wrong. And if you guess wrong with infrastructure, you guessed wrong with a lot of investments, and there are people who invested in Betamax, those who remember this debate, and it had an adverse effect on their business because they were wrong. So one of the things that we struggle with now, I mentioned hydrogen fuel cells versus battery electric. Well, there's one kind of infrastructure for a battery, there's another kind of infrastructure for hydrogen, and they're really different. And it doesn't fit, right? And I think the answer is that, at least with respect to those two technologies, there's probably room for both. But even still, you need to understand how to plan for that. And so that's a piece right there. It's just figuring out, how this technology war, or let's just say growth, is going to play out. And then there's the cost, which we've talked about.
Yeah. Maybe for someone in the audience, it's about Blu-ray versus DVD versus streaming now.
Yeah.
So that's the shift change there. But yeah, Daniel.
Yeah, I think realistically the way to look at it is how can sustainability be a side effect of all of the other things that we have to do as an industry. Already the panelists have talked about increasing their visibility, increasing ETA capabilities, all of these things. So, our customers are driving us to have better systems. We talked about vinyl earlier, and the automotive industry is extremely nostalgic about their old systems. They love the in-house systems, and even to the point of a lot of the direction today is how can we create our own in-house systems again. And I was joking with someone earlier that this weekend I've got plans to build my own car in my shed also. So instead of going to Nissan or someone who has the expertise and has the tools to do it. So I think that it's a paradigm shift into, okay, how can we leverage some of the tools that are out there? How can we increase our efficiency and our capabilities to answer the call of disruptions of our customer demand, all of these things. But then how can they be more sustainable? ICO had worked with the port, they worked with the local government in order to get funding for those windmills. And so any excess electricity that they're generating, which a port facility, or if you're by the ocean, you're constantly under wind power, let's say. So you can move those windmills constantly and you can sell the electricity back. So from that aspect, they cover what they need as they make that shift into supporting more and more EVs, but they're also able to support their own local ecosystem with power when they don't need it, right? And it's the same thing when we think about solar panels at maybe a factory. So from factory outgate to when the car leaves on a truck or on rail car, there's been these hail systems that have been out for a while where some of them even incorporate solar panels. And so for a long time, I thought, oh, that's a cool concept, but cost. So how are we going to do that? But if you can reduce your damage and you can increase your power that's then being fed back into either your EV charging or your production plant or something like that, and you're already getting, I don't want to say forced, but regulations are pushing people to be net zero and take sustainability more seriously. All of these things are sustainability as a side effect, right? So you're getting pushed in that direction. You have to somehow support EVs, right? So the manufacturers are building them, whether you're a 3PL or a manufacturer, you have to get charging infrastructure in. So are you going to buy the electricity, or are you going to use your space to create your own? And so I think there's just a lot of things that can be done once we get over a little bit of the nostalgia factor. But I do want to say that the automotive industry as a whole is also very innovative, right? So I don't want to say that we don't move or that we're doing the same thing from when Dennis was shipping his stagecoaches. But, you know, we really are innovative and we change. And COVID has shown that, because we came together as an industry and we had to adapt how processes are done, how we answer that call. The chip shortage, kind of same thing. But, you know, as we increase our capabilities, we're going to be doing better. To Rocky's point as well, rail is a black hole for, you know, for a majority of people. Rail is also a capacity crunch with rail car shortages, so TrinityRail might be able to solve that as well. But getting the right equipment in the right place and being able to track that equipment, I think, is going to reduce the hesitancy to rail versus doing truck. And that's going to solve a lot of issues as well, where you know, the guys from Nissan are working with Georgia Tech to see how do we hot seat, and you know, that's a great concept. How do we more localize our distribution network when it is on truck, so that we can use rail for long haul and then have a smaller driver pool but leverage them more efficiently, so that we get the cars to the dealership as quickly as possible, but also they can be home at night, because, I mean, who doesn't want to be home at night, right? So looking after those drivers and giving them those benefits is going to allow us to be more efficient, and it's also going to get that talent retention and also bring new talent on, because I think that's a huge piece of it. For me, the allure of being a long-haul trucker is not there, to be honest with you. Yeah.
I think maybe, you know, Rocky, you know, we're talking about the kind of change of mindset as well, right? And of course, you said that this is, you outwardly said you're not an expert in this area, but it's a passion for you. So, you know, I think part of this is also change in mindset as well, right? So,
Absolutely. I mean, it was said very well before me, which is, you know, big hurdles are cost and time. I mean, those are always going to be the biggest hurdles, but there's other considerations. You can be passionate, but you have to be pragmatic, and that's twofold. First and foremost, it's going to take time to develop new technologies and to find the right technologies. First and foremost, for us, safety is number one, right? The sustainability of your people comes before anything else. That being said, developing new rail products takes years. It takes years of engineering, of testing to make sure that we have the safest product out there. In addition to that, we already have 1.6 million assets, railcar assets online, right? What do you do with those? I just mentioned that those are 50-year assets. Whether that's rail cars or it's trucks or it's cars on the road, you have an existing infrastructure, you have an existing asset base. It's not pragmatic to go out and just, or sustainable to go out and just replace them all. So it's a process. It's something that is a sniper approach, not a shotgun approach. What you can do in the meantime, though, is you can take a look at your existing infrastructure, your existing assets, and start looking at them differently and trying to figure out what you can do to those assets to make them more sustainable while the transition is happening, right? While all this innovation is happening, what can you do with what you have on the ground right now? And that goes back to looking at things like aerodynamic side screens or EV or hydrogen fuel cells, things that you can start looking at and preparing for the transition into what is going to be a greener climate and a greener environment and a greener industry moving forward.
Chris, that shift in mindset, shift in change, you're driving that, you're at the helm of that there at the Port of Los Angeles. How are you going about, you know, not only making the big things, but the small things as well?
Well, I think it was well said that people are conservative. There is a hesitancy to move to new things. So we find ways to incentivize it. We give incentives for people to try new technologies. We help pay for it. We give them reductions in fees and things like that to help give them an incentive to do it. But to be honest with you, I mean, that's a big part of it, is, you know, you just have to kind of defray the cost, because, you know, these folks are running a business, and so they have to, you know, be able to justify it. But honestly, a lot of them are willing to work with us. We got terminals who say, yeah, come on, we'll test that stuff. We'll do it. And they're really honest, sometimes brutally honest, about what it is, that whether it worked or not. You know, not going to mention any names, but there's one set of equipment that was tested by one of our terminals, and they said, get rid of it. It was crap. And then another set of equipment that they also tested, they said, we'll keep these, we'll take these, we'll run them. And so, frankly, that's what you want. You want that kind of feedback, but they're a lot more open than you think, and it's because their customers are pushing them. The business case for them is starting to make sense to make these transitions as well, and so incentives and other inducements can help, and then the fact that the industry and the world is really demanding these kinds of things is helping us as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I guess from your side of things, CO2, and for everybody, I guess, but CO2 is one element of that, but then there's lots of other things that you as a
health risk. The biggest one is health risk. We are, as is, I always tell the funny story. This is a 30-second funny story. We're in a hurry here, but when I was a kid, I lived near a rail yard and a cement factory and a paint factory, and I thought it was great because we got to play around and we saw all this equipment and it was really cool, and there were all these little places for us cubby holes for us to crawl into, and air quality issues, of course, and all kinds of problems that I didn't know about that. But it's not at all surprising that near industrial facilities you have, communities, and in many cases they're environmental justice communities, people that don't have the ability to push back when it comes to impacts. Maybe they don't even know their impacts. So health risk, yeah, you got to reduce diesel particulate matter. You get that with zero emissions. Yeah. But yeah, you got to reduce diesel particulate matter. You got to reduce impacts. Truck trips through neighborhoods. Kids are around. Like me when I was a kid, we used to try to hop on the back of a little train as it went on a spur, and I shouldn't admit that, but we did. We used to put a little penny on the track and see what happened to it, and all these little things that we did. But that's not good. And so trying to have those kinds of safety concerns as well is important for a big operation like the port. And we don't run all the equipment. It's a bunch of folks who do it, and we kind of work together as partners.
Perfect. I know we're kind of running shortly out of time, but maybe just one last comment from each one of you in terms of what's the one thing that you want to see change in the next year. Rocky.
I think what I'd like to see change in the next year that would contribute to sustainability, if I had to pick one thing, it's a normalized supply chain. And I say that because our supply chain's in crisis right now. And when the supply chain's in crisis, it doesn't allow us to be forward thinking on what we're going to be doing for sustainability. Everyone's just trying to get through the day at this point. I had the pleasure of flying in on Monday, and I saw your backlog out there on the ocean, and I took a picture of it to remind myself every time I gripe about my email backlog that it could be worse, So, but normalizing that supply chain so that we can start, instead of being in the moment trying to solve the crisis, be a little more forward thinking and get back on track on looking towards the future instead of the present. That would be my one wish.
Daniel?
How do you follow that up? So can't really top that, but yeah, that's a really good point, that when we're in crisis, you can't focus on being better in the future, right? So it's only looking as far as 5 feet in front of you versus 200 yards or something along those lines. So yeah, that, and I think we're going to continue to drive in that direction. I'm very optimistic for our industry, just for if you see the adoption of the number of manufacturers making EVs or hydrogen fuel cell or just alternative vehicles or alternative fueled vehicles in general, to see the amount of models out there and also the adoption from the customers. What that means to me is that it's a massive driver, and we're going to continue to go in that way with the products. And then obviously we're going to move in that way for how we move the products and how we get them there. So, I think if we can get things to not be in crisis mode and have the disruptions be a little bit more spaced out, they'll never stop. But if we could have them, be able to breathe and then go to the next one, that would be great. But yeah, no, I think sustainability it's pushed to the bottom of the list right now. but it rises pretty quickly once we're out of all of these crises that are occurring. Chris?
On national goods movement strategic planning. It would be good to see, and it's happening, but I would really like to see more of it, where you identify goods movement, not just ships, this is everything across the land. Goods movement corridors, goods movement facilities, goods movement modes that are important to move cargo across the country. Focus government resources and planning on those areas. Focus on policy to help facilitate the movement of goods in more efficient and environmentally beneficial ways, and support the transition to greener and cleaner technologies as part of that planning. That kind of strategic planning needs to occur, I think, from Washington. And when you do that, you're able to really focus on all of the elements of goods movement. We're just the port, but there's the airport, there's trucks and trains, there's everything that goods are moved by. And if you can do a strategic plan that focuses on how to optimize those routes and optimize those movements and support the idea of transitioning those to greener and cleaner technologies, that would be great.
Fantastic. I think there's some really good points there, and this has been a great conversation. We could talk about it for so much longer, and I'm sure there's lots of other things that you're doing at the port there, Chris, and that we could talk about. But it's been a great discussion. Thank you very much. Thanks to the panel here for being part of this conversation.
Hyundai Glovis's mission is to make the world better connected by maximizing customer value. Every day, we are making the world an ever smaller place and increasing customer value. Your value chain partner. This is